How to bind off knitting. Hi everyone, my name is Norman and today I want to show you everything you need to know about binding off knitting. I'll start with the basics for beginners and then I'll show you altogether 10 alternatives from stretchy to super fancy and almost invisible, and of course many tips and tricks for more advanced knitters along the way that might surprise you. So let's dive right into it, but before, please do me a favor. If you like to scroll through the comments and read from knitters all across the globe as much as I do, then please comment right now with your go-to bind off technique or your favorite trick when finishing a project. Let's show you how to do a standard bind off first. If you are an experienced knitter, consider using the chapter function to skip ahead. A bind off, sometimes also called cast off, secures the stitches of your last row and prevents your knitting from unraveling. Start by knitting 2 normal stitches as a preparation. 2 normal knit stitches, and now you have 2 stitches on your right needle, and now you can pass that second stitch over the first and drop it off your needle, and there you go, you bound off the first stitch. Easy as that. Now knit another stitch, and now you have 2 stitches on your right needle again, and you pass the second stitch over the first and drop it. Knit another stitch and pass it over. Let's bind off a couple of more stitches in slow motion. And from here you basically continue binding off in that manner until you reach the very last stitch. So now there's only 1 stitch here left on the left needle, and here you have 2 options. First, you can just knit that stitch, pass the second stitch over, and now you can break the yarn, and pull that last stitch all the way out. And this will create a little knot that will secure your whole bind off. It's very simple, but it also often leaves this little ear behind. See, everything is straight, and here you end up with this little ear. And if you want to create a super neat last stitch, you have to do it a little bit differently. To create a super neat last stitch when binding off, you have to do something a little bit more challenging, but don't worry, you can do it. So when it's time to knit that last stitch, you don't knit it as normal, instead you slip it. And then you see this V here, it's a bit twisted here, 1 row below. And you pick up the left leg of that loop and slip it back to your left needle. And then you slip back that loop back to the left needle as well. And then you knit these 2 stitches together. You knit them together, and now you pass over that remaining stitch as before. Then you can pull out the loop and see no ear and a super pretty and straight last bind off stitch. Isn't this amazing? Before I show you the other bind off techniques, I want to show you 3 more tricks. And a quick reminder, if things are going too fast for you, kindly check out my second channel where I have slow motion videos of all standard knitting techniques. I'll link it to you up in here and in the description below. So the problem with this standard bind off is that it is not very stretchy. It's easy but not very stretchy, meaning if you use this technique to bind off the cuff of a pair of socks or some wrist warmers or, well, I don't know, the edge of a lace shawl, you will pretty soon notice that it would constrict your fabric and it is not stretchy enough. In these cases, you have to unravel your bind off. You can do that. You can unravel your bind off one stitch at a time and get all these stitches back to your knitting needle. And once you unravel that bind off, you do it again, but this time you don't use the same knitting needle. Instead, you use a knitting needle 1, 2, or 3 sizes larger, and then you stick to the very same technique. So you bind off just the way I just showed you, but you do it around a bigger needle, and this will automatically create a stretchier edge. What you can also do is you can pull out these stitch a little bit further. So with every stitch you bind off, you pull these stitches out a bit. I'm exaggerating now, but this too will create a stretchier edge. Now, no matter what you do, you won't ever create a super stretchy edge with this technique, but sometimes you only need a little bit extra, and then this can be a valid technique. The second little bind off trick. When you are knitting in the round, you will often end up with a little stair here at the gap, not very pretty, and you can prevent that in a very similar way. So when you come to that last stitch, you bind it off as normal. Don't lift back this loop here, because then you will create this. That trick doesn't work when you're knitting in the round, because it will free this loop here and create a lot of slack. So instead you bind off as normal. You bind off as normal, but now you thread the tail on a tapestry needle. Thread the tail on a tapestry needle. And now here, on the other side of the gap, see this little V here? See this little V here? And you pull your tapestry, you go underneath that V here. And here on the other side, there is another chain of V's here. And you go underneath that one as well, coming in from behind. Then you pull tight. See? It closed the gap, and now you can hide that tail here on the wrong side, and you end up and weave in the tail the regular way, and you end up with a super neat transition that is almost invisible. And the third thing, you can also bind off in pattern, for example, when you are knitting a 2x2 rib stitch or so. So basically a bind off does two things. It adds one more row of knitting and it secures the stitches. So you knit one stitch. So I'm pulling here this loop through this stitch. So I knitted one stitch, and then I secure the previous stitch by pulling that loop over here. So I added one row and then I secured it. Let's do that one more time. So I knit one stitch, and then I secure that stitch by attaching it to the next loop. But it's very important to understand that the knitting part doesn't secure the stitches. It's only the passing over part. So when you are knitting a 2x2 rib stitch, as in this case, you can also decide to bind off in pattern. So you knit every stitch the way it appears before you pass it over. This next stitch has a little bump at its base, so this means it's a purl stitch. So I purl it and then I pass over. Next stitch has this little bump here at its base. I purl it and pass over. Here, this stitch has a V here at its base. This means it's a knit stitch, so I knit it before I pass over. Here is a little knit V again, and so on. And in that manner, you can bind off in pattern for, ribbings, moss stitch, or any other knit purl combination. And if you bind off in pattern, you will create a very seamless transition towards the edge. Let's focus here on this purl row. See, there are purl stitches up until the very edge, whereas over here, where I didn't bind off in pattern, you end up with a little V here, two V's here below the edge. Now, neither method is inherently better. It just creates a different edge. When you bind off in pattern, you kind of end up with a zigzaggy line, whereas when you bind off the regular way, the edge here is rather straight. But of course, here you get a seamless transition, especially when stretched out. Whereas here you end up with the V's. I leave it up to you which one you prefer. And of course, for the advanced knitters, you can also knit these stitches through the back loop or purl through the back loop or whatever your pattern requires before you pass them over. Now, if you like these tips and tricks, then absolutely consider becoming a patron. Shooting my videos takes a lot of time and effort. By supporting me on my Patreon account, you can help me create more videos like this one. Plus, I also share much more advanced tips and tricks there, things you typically don't see anywhere else. You will also find the link to my Patreon account in the description below. Even a small contribution helps. Part 2. Alternative bind-off techniques. Here in the second part of this video, I want to show you quite a couple of different ways to bind off knitting. I want this video to be a complete resource with options for every project. But before I can do this, I want you to understand what a bind-off actually is. A bind-off is a technique most knitters are very familiar with. It is essentially nothing else but a decrease. Let me show you. Let's knit an SSK, slip, slip, knit, the most popular left-leaning decrease together. So I slip one knitwise, slip another knitwise, slip these two stitches back to the left needle, and then I knit them together through the back loop. Well, this looks oddly familiar. Now, what happens if I slip that stitch back to the left needle? And now I knit another SSK into these stitches. Knit them together, through the back loop. Well, this is odd. Doesn't it look like the bind-off? In fact, it does. So a bind-off is nothing else but, the standard bind-off is nothing else but chaining a row of SSKs. So this realization will help you in two ways. First of all, now you know a different way to knit an SSK or a left-leaning decrease. You can always slip one stitch, knit one stitch, and then pass that stitch over. It will be the exact same thing. And secondly, you can adjust the way you bind off by picking a different decrease, or you can add a little something in between before you pass over or so for more stretchiness or a more decorative edge. Let's take a look at your options. So the first application of these two principles I want to show you is a very nice stretchy bind off for a 2x2 rib stitch. Typically, a 2x2 rib stitch is much too stretchy for a standard bind off, and in these cases you could bind off like this. So you start by knitting 2 stitches as you normally would. But now you don't pass this stitch over. Instead, you will be inserting your needle into these 2 stitches one more time, and now you knit them together through the back loop. And from here you bind off in pattern. So the next stitch is a purl stitch, so you purl it. Then you insert your left needle into these 2 stitches one more time, and then you purl them together. The next stitch is a purl stitch, so you purl it. And whenever you purl the stitch, you purl these 2 stitches together. Then the next stitch is a knit stitch, knit it, and insert the left needle one more time and knit these 2 stitches together through the back loop. So essentially what you are doing here is, first of all, because you don't pass that stitch over right away, you are, through decreasing, adding, a decrease adds a stitch just like a knit stitch. So you are adding 1 stitch here in between the bind off, so to speak. And the second thing you are doing is you are picking a different decrease. So usually you do for a normal bind off, it's an SSK, but here you are doing a purl 2 together or a purl knit 2 together through the back loop, and these are a tiny bit looser than an SSK, and that adds further stretchiness. And here's one more tip: you don't have to use this bind off for a 2x2 rib stitch. You could also use it for any other knit purl combination, as long as you stick to the golden rule. Whenever it's a purl stitch, you purl these 2 stitches together, and whenever it's a knit stitch, you knit them together through the back loop, and in that manner you could bind off any other knitting stitch pattern as well for a super stretchy bind off. Just one little note here: this bind off will flare out a bit. So as you can see, it will get wider here. It's super stretchy, but it will flare out a bit. When you're knitting, I don't know, socks toe up and use this for the cuff, then you will have no problem, because the bind off will typically be under tension anyway whenever you wear the socks. But suppose you're knitting a scarf or so, then this, in a 2x2 rib stitch, then this might not be the best choice. Another way to knit a stretchy bind off is the so-called yarn over bind off. Here you add a little bit of extra give through working in simple yarn overs as you bind off. Let's take a look. So you start by knitting 2 stitches as you normally would, and then you pass the second stitch over. But now you don't knit the next stitch, instead you do a yarn over, and then you pass the new second stitch over. Then you knit 1 stitch, bind off, and now you add a yarn over, pass over. So between every stitch you add a simple yarn over for that little bit of extra give. It's super simple and very easy to remember. Always bind off 1 stitch, yarn over, bind off 1 stitch, yarn over. Super simple. And of course you can use this stretchy bind off for any other pattern as well. And of course I want you to know that it doesn't have to be a yarn over. You could also do a backward loop increase, or I don't know, a knitted cast on before you bind off. The general idea here is just that you add an increase here in between every stitch for that little bit of extra stretchiness. Again, as you can see, this will flare a bit, but for the right kind of pattern, it can be a great and easy choice. The third bind off I want to show you is called Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. It's a bind off technique popularized by Jeny Stament around 2009 and quickly became a knitter's favorite. It works with yarn overs as well, but you don't add them in between the stitches. Instead, you use the yarn over to add some slack to the edge. A bit like patterns where you knit into a row below. Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off works for any knitting stitch pattern, but I am knitting a 1x1 rib stitch here. So you have to bind off in pattern and add yarn overs or backward yarn overs depending on if the next stitch is a knit stitch or a purl stitch. Whenever the next stitch is a knit stitch, you have to add a backward yarn over. So this is a regular yarn over, this is a backward yarn over. And then you knit 1 stitch and pass that yarn over the one you knitted. The next stitch is a purl stitch, and then you can do a regular yarn over, purl 1 stitch, and now you have 3 stitches on your right needle, and you will double decrease these 2 stitches right away. The next stitch is a knit stitch, so you need to add a backward yarn over, knit 1 stitch, and then bind off these 2 stitches, and that's already it. The next stitch is a purl stitch, so a regular yarn over will do. Then you purl 1 and you decrease these 2 stitches right away. Next stitch is a knit stitch, so you do a backward yarn over, knit 1 and pass things over, and that's already it. And the way to think of this is you want to create a full wrap here around your knitting needle. And for a purl stitch, when you do a yarn over and then you bring the yarn forward to purl, you are creating a full wrap. And then you can pass things over. For a knit stitch, the yarn stays in the back. So if you were to knit the next stitch, you would only create a half wrap. So that's why you do a backward yarn over, so that you can create a full wrap. And that's already the whole secret to Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. So this is the edge Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off creates. As you can see, it creates a super stretchy edge that kind of bounces back again. So where's the difference compared to a yarn over bind off? Well, a yarn over bind off, if you know crochet, it kind of creates a chain stitch in between each little bind off stitch, whereas a Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off adds an increase, so the yarn over, but uses a double decrease to get rid of it straight away, and this basically adds a little bit of buffer or a little yarn reservoir here at the base you can use whenever you need to stretch things out. As a result, it will typically, it will flare out less than the yarn over bind off, and I guess that's why so many knitters like this. And here's one important note. Of course, you can use Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off for any other knitting stitch pattern as well. It doesn't have to be a 1x1 rib stitch. So for example, if you were to knit a 2x2 rib stitch, you could use the exact same technique. The only thing you need to remember is when the next stitch is a purl stitch, you do a regular yarn over, then you purl 1, pass over 2, and then you check, well, what's the next stitch? And if it's a purl stitch, you do a regular yarn over, purl 1, and pass over 2. And whenever the next stitch is a knit stitch, you do a backward yarn over, knit 1, and pass over 2. So it's the exact same technique. You only need to bind off in pattern the way your stitches appear. Now, what if you would like to have a stretchy bind off, but you want it to be a bit more invisible without flaring out like this? Then the Italian bind off will be your best friend. It only properly works for a 1x1 rib stitch, but then and there it is super pretty, and it will mirror the effect a Italian cast on will create. The bad news is that you actually don't knit it, you graft it using a tapestry needle. So it's a lot of extra work, but it will be worth it. So first of all, you need to break the yarn, leaving a tail that is around, 4 times as long as your work is wide, and then maybe add 5 inches for good measure. Then thread the tail on a blunt tapestry needle, and then we need to do a Kitchener stitch. That's right, the Italian bind-off is basically doing a standard Kitchener stitch, but you do it on one needle, which basically means you could also separate these stitches and slip all the knit stitches on one needle and all the purl stitches on one needle like this. So that's how you could do it, and then you could work a standard Kitchener stitch. But since that is a lot of work, especially if you are working, I don't know, the hem of a sweater or so, doing it on one needle is actually much easier. So we need to start with 2 preparation stitches. Go through the first stitch purlwise. It should be a knit stitch. Go through the first stitch purlwise. Purlwise. And then go through the adjacent purl stitch here knitwise, coming in from behind. So you get in from behind here in between these gaps, and then you go in knitwise. You can do it directly, but if you are a bit scared or not experienced enough, no worries, pull it through and then do it like this in 2 steps. This was only the preparation, and from here we can start with the actual repeat. So enter the first stitch here on your needle knitwise and knitwise, and drop it off the needle, and then go through the adjacent knit stitch. So we are skipping this purl stitch here. Go through the adjacent knit stitch, the next knit stitch purlwise, but keep the stitch on the needle, and then maybe pull tight. Now we need to work this purl stitch. So we go into this next purl stitch here purlwise and drop it off the needles. And now comes the only tricky part. We need to go through the next purl stitch here, but we need to do it from behind. So go in between the gap here and then enter that purl stitch knitwise. Be careful that you don't accidentally split the yarn. And that's already it. Let's do it one more time. So slip the knit stitch knitwise, very easy to remember. Slip the knit stitch knitwise. Then go into the next knit stitch purlwise, skipping the purl stitch. Then slip the purl stitch, the next purl stitch purlwise, again very easy to remember, and go through the next purl stitch knitwise. So you always go into the next stitch the other way. So it's always knitwise, drop, and purlwise, keep. And for, well, what is the back side? You drop purlwise and you go in knitwise. If you have problems remembering this repeat, then I really urge you to watch my video on the true anatomy of knit stitches, and I'm sure it will be a very, very big revelation. I'll link it to you up in here and in the description below, because sure, you can write it all on a little piece of cardboard, but once you truly understand what a knit stitch actually is, drafting even complex patterns like this one will be so easy, and you will shake your head in wonder why you ever had problems memorizing a repeat like this one. So do watch the video if that sounds like a skill you would like to have. Either way, super simple. Always drop knitwise, keep purlwise, drop purlwise, and enter knitwise, coming from behind. I split the yarn here, and we can already see this beautiful invisible edge here emerging. Either way, once you finished the Italian bind-off, the edge will look like this, very pretty. And I hope you can see how these individual knit ridges kind of roll over to the other side, and you get this very well balanced rounded edge, especially after blocking things. And of course, as promised, it doesn't really flare out like this. You get a nice even edge. And you can use the exact same technique to bind off double knitting. Often people will then call it double knitting bind off, but it's the exact same method. A very popular variation of the Italian bind-off here is the so-called tubular bind-off. It's actually the exact same technique, but it kind of got rewarded a separate name because you add a couple of rows of double knitting before you bind off. Again, this is a technique that looks best for a 1x1 rib stitch. So for the tubular bind-off, you need to knit 2 setup rows in double stockinette stitch before you bind off, and it's super simple. You always knit the knit stitches and slip the purl stitches purlwise with yarn in front. Knit the knit stitches, slip the purl stitches purlwise with yarn in front. Knit the knit stitches, slip the purl stitches with yarn in front. So it is super simple, and you only have to pay attention that you slip these purl stitches the right way. It will feel kind of uncommon at first, but after 100 stitches or so, it will feel quite natural. And then you turn around and do the same thing. Knit the knit stitches, and slip the purl stitches with yarn in front. So it's a very simple pattern. If you were to knit in the round, then you would have to knit the second round like this. So I'm knitting flat, but imagine we were in the round. In the round, you would have to purl the purl stitches and slip the knit stitches purlwise with yarn in back. Purl the purl stitches and slip the knit stitches with yarn held in back. I'm going to undo this here. And once you finished these 2 preparation rows in double stockinette stitch, you break your yarn, leaving a tail that is around 4 times as long as your project is wide, thread it on a tapestry needle and start grafting. So there are 2 preparation stitches again, just to repeat. Enter that very first stitch purlwise and go through the first purl stitch knitwise, coming in from behind. Maybe do that separately because I seem to split the yarn here. No, it's okay. And then you can start with the exact same repeat I showed you before. So slip the knit stitches knitwise and keep purlwise, then pull tight, then drop the purl stitch here, the next purl stitch purlwise, very simple to remember, and go through the adjacent purl stitch knitwise from behind. Drop knitwise, drop knitwise, I think it's out of focus here, drop knitwise and go through the adjacent stitch purlwise, drop purlwise, and so on. By now you should know this repeat by heart, and I'm going to fast forward to show you the result. So here's my little tubular bind off after grafting. Of course, you should block things to even it out. It will help. But you might wonder, well, where's the difference compared to the Italian bind off? Well, the tubular bind off received its name because it creates an actual tube here. So you can insert your knitting needle, for example, into this tube here at the top. And you could use this to insert a drawstring or so. In this case, you might want to knit 4 instead of 2 rows of double stockinette stitch for a larger tube here at the top. Otherwise, both are really pretty. Now I can already see the more advanced knitters commenting that you can also use the same grafting method to bind off a 2x2 rib stitch. You will have to shuffle stitches around before grafting, which is both a bit annoying, and I personally, I don't really like the way this looks for a 2x2 rib stitch, but of course do comment if you have a different opinion. Now, at this point in this video, I think it's important to talk about another thing. Sometimes a bind off needs to be stretchy, sure enough, but sometimes you also want it to be super pretty, and you won't finish every pattern in the 1x1 rib stitch. So I want to introduce a couple of ornamental bind off techniques. First of all, the Picot bind off. I have a full video on the Picot bind off here on my channel with many wonderful variations, but let's cover the basics together. Start by binding off 1 stitch the regular way. So knit 2 and pass over the 2nd stitch. And now we are ready to create these little picots. So slip the remaining stitch back to your left needle. And now you need to cast on 2 stitches with a knitted cast on. 1 and 2, just 2 stitches, and you bind off these stitches right away. So knit 2 stitches, pass over, and knit another stitch and pass over. And now you need to bind off 2 more stitches to bridge this gap. 1 and 2, and then slip that remaining stitch back to the left needle, and here is our first little picot. Let's do that one more time. So cast on 2 stitches with a knitted cast on, and then bind off these stitches right away, and then bind off 2 more stitches. You can also cast on more than 2 stitches, so for example 3, 1, 2, and 3, and then you bind off 3 stitches straight away to create a much bigger picot. For a balanced edge, you should always keep as many stitches as you cast on in between these picots. So in this case, I'm going to bind off 3 stitches here for this bigger picot. One thing you will notice is that these picots will have a little eyelet here at its base, or at their base. And if you don't want that, you need to adjust the repeat a tiny little bit. So you cast on 2 stitches and bind them off straight away. So far everything remains the same. But now when you come across this gap here, you don't knit this next stitch. Instead, you lift this left leg here of the stitch 1 row below back to your knitting needle, and you knit it together through the back loop with the next stitch. You can also do a regular knit 2 together if that's what you prefer. And then you bind off. And let me bind off 1 more stitch. Slip that back, and as you can see, this will eradicate the little eyelet here at the base. You might also notice how I am slipping these knitted cast-ons to the needle twisted. I feel this makes the process much smoother, but if you would like to slip them the regular way, please do that. Again, do watch my full tutorial on the Picot bind off for further details. It's all about your preferences and the pattern you would like to knit. The result will be a pretty and quite ornamental edge. Again, this bind off will flare out quite a bit. It will almost look like frills, but I guess that is the intended effect in most cases. I do recommend blocking the picots so they really pop. Another very pretty way to finish your knitting is the I-cord bind off. You know I-cords, these pretty little strings you knitted using a knitting Nancy or spool as a small kit. Well, you can attach them to your edge straight away and in one breath. Here is how. Start by casting on 3 stitches with a knitted cast on as a preparation. You only have to do this once, so 3 stitches here, and then we can start with the actual repeat. So knit 2 stitches, knit 2 stitches, and then knit the next 2 stitches together through the back loop. So enter through the back loop and knit them together. And then slip back these 3 stitches to the left needle the way you would knit an I-cord. And then knit 2 stitches. And knit the next 2 stitches together through the back loop. Slip back 3 stitches and knit 2. So it's actually a super simple repeat, just like the actual I-cord. And you're slipping back and forth. Now here are a couple of tips. You don't have to knit 2 together through the back loop here. Remember how I said that a bind off is just a string of decreases in the beginning? So the knit 2 together through the back loop is the actual bind off. The rest of the stitches are, they just add volume to the I-cord. As a result, you can also knit any other left leaning decrease here. For example, an SSK. It really doesn't matter, and I toyed around with quite a couple of versions like knit 2 together through the back loop, knit 2 together left, SSK, PK, and so on. And in my experience, the result, you really don't notice the difference. However, one or the other method will be easier to knit for you, and as a result, I would stick to that method. And the second thing I want you to know is that you can also knit all of these stitches here, for example, through the back loop before you decrease. So knit all stitches through the back loop for a tighter bind off, or you could purl them, or here in the beginning you can cast on 1 more stitch, so 4 stitches or just 2 stitches, so for a bigger or smaller I-cord. So it's really a technique to have fun with, just like you can have so much fun with a normal I-cord. And here at the very end, when there are only 3 stitches left, you can finish your I-cord bind off with any double decrease. For example, a knit 3 together through the back loop, a bit more difficult to knit, and then just pull out the yarn and weave in the tail. And once you wove in the tail, this is the way the I-cord bind off edge looks like. Quite pretty. It's not the stretchiest bind off. And the second thing you absolutely need to consider is stockinette stitch is prone to curling. So here you are adding stockinette stitch upon stockinette stitch, which means twice the curling. So personally, I would try to avoid adding the I-cord bind off to stockinette stitch, but for other knitting patterns it can be quite beautiful. Now, after these two very ornamental binders, I think we have time for 3 more. The first one I would like to mention is the so-called Icelandic binder. It's very stretchy, yarn efficient and quick, and almost looks like an I-cord, but it takes like not even half as long to knit. It will feel a bit weird at first, but the repeat is actually remarkably simple, so bear with me. Start the Icelandic binder by knitting 1 stitch. And now slip that stitch back to the right needle, twist it so it's mounted the right way, coming from behind to the front. Now insert that right needle into that slipped stitch purlwise. But now don't knit that stitch. Instead, you knit the second stitch here through that stitch, and then you drop both stitches off the needle. And that was already the full repeat. Again, slip that stitch back to the left needle, twist it. Insert from right to left, so purlwise. Bring that loop forth and knit it. And drop both stitches off the right needle. Again, slip that stitch back to the needle, twist it, insert from right to left, bring that stitch forth and knit it. Let's do it a couple of more times in slow motion. As you can see, it's a very, if a bit unusual repeat with a stunning effect. It, as I said before, it almost looks a bit like an I-cord, but it's much stretchier than one and also quite a bit faster to knit. So definitely a bind-off to keep in your toolbox. Now, the almost last bind-off I want to show you is the sewn bind-off. There are, of course, many other bind-off methods, but for example, Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind-off has almost the same effect as the suspended bind-off, and the yarn over bind-off is more or less the same, or has the same look and feel as the Chinese waitress bind-off. So instead I want to show you this sewn bind-off because it adds yet another element. It works with a tapestry needle, but don't be scared, this is super simple. So break the yarn, leaving a tail that is around 3 times as long as your project is wide. Thread it on a tapestry needle and start sewing. Start by going through, and this is super simple really, start by going through the first 2 stitches on your needle as if to purl and pull the yarn through. And then go through only the first stitch knitwise and drop that stitch off the needle. And that's already it. It's so simple. Go through the first 2 stitches as if to purl, pull through, and drop the first stitch knitwise. Go through the first 2 stitches as if to purl, I think I split the yarn here, as if to purl, and drop the first stitch knitwise. The only thing you really have to, this is so simple, but the only thing you have to pay attention is that you kind of try to meet the gauge of the overall fabric and don't pull too tight here. Otherwise, this is simple in the extreme, and I guess That's why a lot of knitters like this bind off so much despite needing a tapestry needle. And here at the very end, when there is only one stitch left, just go through it purlwise. Go through it purlwise. And then use the tail to weave in the end. I mean, it's already on the tapestry needle, so that's quite easy. So this is another lovely binder that really works well together with a long tail cast on. And the great thing about this bind off is that you get to decide how stretchy it is depending on how tightly you pull after every stitch. So it's another great bind off to keep in your knitting toolbox. Here at the very end of this video, I want to show you a bind off that works a little bit differently, the 3 needle bind off. You can use it to close seams in a very invisible and secure way. So it's a wonderful technique for people who don't like grafting. And it's super simple. You have to align the 2 pieces you want to join so the knit sides are facing each other. If you are knitting in the round, you have to do this inside out. Imagine this is magic loop and you just do it inside out. And then you pick up the working yarn if it's still attached, or use a spare length of yarn and pick up a 3rd needle. And then it's super simple. You just enter the 1st stitch on the 1st needle knitwise and the 1st stitch on the 2nd needle knitwise. And then you knit these 2 stitches together. So pull the yarn through both stitches and drop them off the needle. And then you do the exact same. You enter both stitches and knit them together. And now you have 2 stitches on your right needle, and what can you do? Well, you pass the 2nd stitch over and bind it off. And from here you can basically work a standard bind off. So you always knit 2 together from both needles, and then you pass the 2nd stitch over to bind it off. So very simple. So if you know how to knit 2 together and bind off, this technique will be super simple. It is a bit fiddly, so what you can do is you can transfer these stitches to one needle before you work the bind off. So you always slip one from the back needle and one from the front needle, one from the back, one from the front, and then you knit them together. It might be a bit easier for some knitters and a bit less fiddly, but advanced knitters will obviously often do this. But see, sometimes you slip off these stitches. So if you notice this is happening, well, then slip the stitches to a separate needle before you work the bind off. But if you're comfortable with working through both needles, then please do that. So just to show you the difference, if you slip all stitches to a separate needle before you do the bind off, it's actually even easier. See, you just knit these 2 stitches together and then you pass over. So that is well, it involves 2 steps, but it will be easier for some knitters. The result will be this rather invisible and quite sturdy seam. So this can be a great choice for the shoulders of a sweater where you don't want to use a Kitchener stitch, because often what will happen is the whole weight of the sweater is wearing on those seams, and the 3 needle bind off lends the seam a bit of structural support so it doesn't wear out as quickly. What you can also do is you can use the same technique to attach another piece of fabric to an existing fabric. And in this case, you just do the knit 2 together part and you don't bind the stitches off right away. You just knit them together. So you join the 2 pieces together. And this could be a very nice option whenever you want to create a pocket or so. Anyway, That's how to bind off knitting and all the different alternatives. Please like this video if you enjoy watching. Comment with your questions and your feedback. And of course, don't forget to subscribe in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.